And this is Africa 54. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter receives a state funeral at the Washington National Cathedral before his burial in Georgia. President-elect Donald Trump vows to reverse President Joe Biden's offshore oil and gas drilling ban after taking office. And the Seychelles battles heroin trade with the help of the United States and China. We'll have a report. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter was honored Thursday with a funeral at Washington National Cathedral before being buried in his home state of Georgia. Carter's living presidential successors, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, attended the Washington funeral. Fellow Democratic President Joe Biden eulogized the 39th president who died on December 29 at the age of 100. Republican President-elect Donald Trump was among the luminaries at the funeral. Tens of thousands of Americans over the past 2 days filed through the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol to pay their respects to Carter, who served from 1977 to 1981 and was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 for his humanitarian work. Washington National Cathedral has hosted the state funerals of Carter's immediate predecessor, Gerald Ford, and successor, Ronald Reagan. For more on the state funeral for former President Jimmy Carter, VOA's Philippe Alexiou joins us live from the Washington National Cathedral. Philippe takes us through some of the highlights from the funeral.
Well, yeah, thanks a lot, Leonard. Glad to be here. The president arrived about an hour ago, and there's really nothing quite like a state funeral for the President of the United States. It's a combination of the honor guard, combination of the colors, and a lot of what may end up happening here shortly, because I think we're getting near the end of the service, but it's coming near the end. The motorcade, when it arrives at 9:30, you have the Marine Orchestra and the Armed Forces Chorus performing a number of tribute songs. And then you have a number of remarks that have been made by a number of people inside today. And interestingly, Ted Mondale, who spoke probably about 20 minutes ago, he's the son of Jimmy Carter's vice president, Walter Mondale. And he talked about his father, Jimmy Carter, about Jimmy Carter's faith and how that affected his life, but also how it affected Ted Mondale's life, and how the faith between the two, and that's sort of a theme with the former president, sort of helped the two of them bond. So I think that was pretty interesting. Yeah. Some of the other things that have been said about the president are very warm, and we've pretty much got dignitaries here from all over. We have former presidents, I think you might have mentioned, President Obama and Bush and others. All having things to say. But,
so, Phil, we're currently looking at we're currently looking at President Biden eulogizing former President Jimmy Carter. Talk to us about how his legacy has been reflected during this ceremony.
Well, the president's legacy is pretty interesting. And for president and humanitarian, and he's really never stopped working to help the lives of his fellow citizens. And when you listen to some of the people who spoke yesterday at the rotunda at the Capitol, I think it's kind of interesting at what a number of them had to say, especially Vice President Harris, who called for Carter's humility, his humility, to be a lesson to everyone. And then Senator John Thune, he talked about Jimmy Carter, how focused he was on making the lives of fellow men better. And President Biden, I think he put it very simply, saying that Jimmy Carter was a man of simple decency. So a lot of what you hear about the former president is his humility, his decency, helping people, especially all the efforts he's done with his Habitat for Humanity, the guinea worm, and going after tackling disease and helping his fellow man, not just in the United States, but around the world. And that is his legacy. So we spoke with people outside the Capitol yesterday, and they also talked about his faith. And I think they talked about really his dignity. You know, Jimmy Carter is probably a far cry from, I think, the politics perhaps that we see today. And I think that's missed by a lot of people. And it's been expressed by people who have come to pay their respects to him during these state visits.
And quickly, Phil, what is the next step? We understand Georgia?
Yeah, so when this service ends and the president is put, his remains are placed back into the hearse, he will go to Joint Base Andrews, and he will fly down to Georgia, and he will have a motorcade there, and people down in Plains, Georgia, in his hometown, are invited to be a part of this motorcade. And he will end up having a service in Plains, Georgia at the Maranatha Baptist Church later on today.
Okay, thank you so much, Philip, for this report. VOA's Philip Alexiou reporting live from the Washington National Cathedral. Now, former Nigerian head of state, General Yakubu Gowon, says the world has lost a leader who led decades-long campaign against neglected tropical diseases, especially guinea worm. General Gowon said Nigeria's success in eradicating the waterborne parasite would not have been possible without the support and commitment of the former U.S. President Jimmy Carter. Gowon spoke with VOA Hausa after a press conference in honor of Jimmy Carter.
Ensuring, trying to deal with various human problems, throughout not only Africa and not only Nigeria, but throughout the world too. To deal with certain things that really trouble ordinary people, and he did his best to deal with them. And that's how he invited me to join him to fight this disease called guinea worm in Nigeria, when we have over 650,000 at that time in about 1998. That is how it was when I started, when he asked me to join him to deal with that particular problem. Honestly, I didn't think much of it to start off with. I said, well, let me just do it. But when I went and saw the suffering of the ordinary people, children, the young people, old people, boys, girls, etc., and this disease, the way it affects, my goodness, it is frightening, and to see the pain they were in. But to see, that although that disease it was so troublesome, one good thing, I've tried to find out, was there any report of any death, from guinea worm? Now, this is something that I think had to be, acknowledged. Now, I haven't. If anybody had seen that, let me know, so that at least, I'll say guinea worm is not only bad, but is evil. If it causes the death of the ordinary man or woman.
Former Nigerian head of state General Yakubu Gowon paying tribute to former U.S. President Jimmy Carter following his death. President Joe Biden on Wednesday approved a federal emergency declaration for California's wildfires that will release money and resources to battle the blazes. Attending a wildfire briefing at a Santa Monica fire station, Biden pledged the federal government will assist the community with rebuilding, but warned that recovery for the area will take time. The Los Angeles County Fire Department faced 4 life-threatening wildfires that have killed at least 2 people, burned more than 1,000 buildings, and forced tens of thousands of people to evacuate. Officials have warned residents to pay attention to evacuation orders and leave when directed. 2,000 National Guard members have been deployed to help local firefighters. In the Pacific Palisades, the fire jumped from one house to the next, pushed by hurricane-force winds. In the same area, firefighters said hydrants had run dry. More than 400,000 homes and businesses are without power across Los Angeles, according to Power Outage US. President-elect Donald Trump says he will undo a sweeping new ban on offshore oil and gas drilling after he takes office on January 20th. President Joe Biden on January 6th announced the prohibition covering most U.S. coastal waters. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias has more.
The benefits of offshore drilling just aren't worth the risks to the environment, health, and economy, says President Joe Biden, especially as the nation moves toward a clean energy economy. So, on January 6th, Biden announced a sweeping new ban on future offshore oil and gas drilling on some 253 million hectares of federal waters. That covers most U.S. coastal waters.
I will reverse it immediately. It'll be done immediately.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump quickly vowed to undo the ban and ramp up offshore drilling after he takes office on January 20th.
And we will drill, baby, drill. And we're going to be drilling in a lot of other locations, and the energy costs are going to come way down.
But legal experts say it may not be easy to reverse the ban because it would likely require an act of Congress. Meanwhile, environmentalists say the new prohibition will help fight climate change.
Science has made clear that any expansion of fossil fuels is incompatible with keeping warming of our world below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the threshold that was set in the Paris Agreement to keep wildfires, hurricanes, other climate disasters from escalating.
Trump has previously expressed skepticism about man-made climate change. And advocates for the offshore energy industry praise the president-elect's stance.
The demand is at 100 million barrels per day for the global economy. And if we're not going to produce that energy here in the U.S., it's going to get produced somewhere. And we believe we have high standards when it comes to environmental protection.
Professor of Marine Biology at Duke University, Andy Reid, acknowledges the world needs oil for now.
We can't instantaneously transition to non-carbon-based sources of energy. So it will take a long time. And even if the pendulum is swinging backwards a little bit now, I think the long-term perspective is going to be towards cleaner sources of energy.
And he adds the transition to greener energy will happen with or without U.S. leadership. Veronica Balderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
Like many of U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet picks, his choice to head the Department of Education, Linda McMahon, has been a major supporter and campaign donor. And for much of her career, she helped lead the World Wrestling Entertainment conglomerate. Despite what many analysts and educators see as her limited experience in education, big shifts in focus are expected under her leadership. VOA's Laurel Bowman explains.
During President-elect Donald Trump's first term as president, Linda McMahon led the U.S. Small Business Administration. Trump's choice for the Department of Education chief has served as a board member at a private college and briefly on a state board of education. Some analysts are worried.
She certainly doesn't have much relevant experience in education, either at the K-12 or higher education level, relative to previous education secretaries.
But many conservative analysts say she'll do well at streamlining the department and limiting its authority, which is what they want.
The Department of Education does not need to be run by an educator. I believe we do need an experienced executive, someone who knows how to manage people, get things done, hold people accountable, understand results and reporting of results.
The department's responsibilities include managing federal student loan and grant programs for higher education, overseeing civil rights, and distributing funds for low-income students. Some educators worry public education will be at risk under a Trump administration and that the most vulnerable students will suffer.
Students with disabilities, our LGBTQ plus students, our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students, are students living in poverty, making higher education even more expensive and further out of the reach of middle-class families.
Many conservatives say the department is bureaucratic and ineffective and should be abolished entirely. That's not likely, but change is coming, say analysts from both sides of the political aisle.
What I see happening over the next 4 years is really a slimming down of the department substantially and really getting the federal government out of the business of education as much as possible.
Incoming Trump administration, I think, believes in cutting back a lot of the federal funding across all programs.
Both sides may agree on promoting technical education as an alternative to a traditional university.
What a lot of high school graduates, what a lot of workers want, is less a 4-year college degree and more the kind of training that's going to help them get better jobs, that's going to help them have more successful lives. Right now, it can be really difficult to use a lot of federal support for higher education at some of these programs.
A Republican-led education department can also be expected to attempt rolling back policies promoted by current President Joe Biden, such as protections for transgender students.
The department has weighed in very heavily on gender disputes in America's schools, encouraging them to adopt policies which emphasize gender rather than biological sex. I think a Trump administration is likely to sharply reverse directions on all of this.
McMahon will need to be approved by the Senate. Analysts expect she will be, with a Republican majority and more controversial cabinet picks for them to consider. Laurel Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
We are excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, Seychelles battles heroin trade and use. Chad's government spokesman says an overnight foiled attack on the presidential compound was carried out by a disorganized band of intoxicated men wielding knives and machetes who were easily neutralized by security forces. Bursts of gunfire rang out near the president's office in the capital N'Djamena on Wednesday night as the military blocked surrounding streets. The government said later it had foiled an attempt to destabilize the country and the situation was under control. Mozambique opposition leader Venancio Mondlane returned from self-exile on Thursday, defiantly claiming to have won a hotly contested October election. The disputed October election, which Mondlane says was rigged, has sparked demonstrations over the past few months, in which hundreds of protesters have been killed in the southern African nation. Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara said on Thursday he would like to continue serving his country as president, but emphasized that his party had not yet made a formal decision on its candidate for this year's election. Ouattara, 83, was re-elected for a contested third term in 2020. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin will host the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in Ramstein, Germany, one final time before he leaves office. VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb, who is traveling with Austin, says the U.S. is expected to announce its final military aid package for Kyiv under the Biden administration.
Officials here say that the U.S. military aid package for Ukraine will be substantial, but it will not include all the $4.3 billion left in Presidential Drawdown Authority. That's the authority that was approved by Congress in April of last year. The U.S. simply needs to replenish its stockpiles before it can send the rest of the aid. Officials tell me that the number, the amount of aid is still being finalized, but that number is looking right now to be about $500 million. The Biden administration has pledged that around 80 or 90% of the aid that has been promised to Ukraine through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, that will make it to Kyiv and to Ukraine by the end of President Biden's term. The exception being things like vehicles specifically that need to be refurbished. They are still being refurbished at this time. They're not going to be ready at the end of the month. And analysts like Bradley Bowman with the Foundation for Defensive Democracies said that some of the delays due to the deliberations of the Biden administration have been very costly to Ukrainians.
I think too often, unfortunately, we've seen kind of this no, maybe, yes dynamic where Ukraine has asked for something and then we have the administration say no, then maybe, and then yes. And then during that time period, we saw Russians advancing, Ukrainians dying, and the delay being costly.
It's a very uncertain time for both Ukraine and the European partners that have helped the United States to support Kyiv over the last 3 years. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in the next administration. Officials say Austin has set the groundwork for the U.S. to continue to lead the group. The group has provided $126 billion in weapons, equipment, and training since Russia's invasion. But when you consider that the U.S. has provided a little more than half of that, it is clear, analysts say, that U.S. leadership is critical.
Look at Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, where where there's the argument of negotiating from a position of strength. I think it would be wise to really surge support to Ukraine in the first months of the new administration to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position in the spirit of the art of the deal to facilitate, to provide Kyiv and Washington leverage in these negotiations.
Analysts have called this a high point in Austin's legacy as defense secretary because he has allowed Ukraine to defend its sovereign territory. And officials here tell me that this is his brainchild. This is something that he cared very much about. That's why he's spending his final days in his position as Secretary of Defense coming to Ramstein to support Ukraine. Carla Babb, VOA News.
Situated in the Indian Ocean off the east coast of Africa, the Seychelles is in the middle of a key heroin smuggling route and has among the highest rates of heroin use in the world. The strategically located archipelago is also a place where the U.S. and China is vying for influence. Kate Bartlett brings us this story from the main island of Mahé with details on the heroin trade and what the U.S. and China are doing to help.
Picture postcard Seychelles is a place of idyllic beauty, loved by foreign tourists. But there's a dark side to this archipelago of just 100,000 people. It has some of the highest global rates of heroin use per capita. Romeo Pierre, a recovering heroin user, is on his way to get his daily dose of methadone.
I got into drug use about when I was in school.
The 23-year-old uses methadone to help with withdrawal symptoms.
I lost my dad when I was 8 years old. He was murdered. So I lost him at a very young age, and it had a very bad effect on me.
A 2023 study funded by the US and European Union found some 10% of the population here is addicted to heroin. To fight the problem, the government rolled out a methadone program as well as a needle exchange initiative. Hans Radegond, head of the Seychelles Coast Guard, says his country, located in the Indian Ocean, is in the middle of one of the heroin smuggling routes that originates from Afghanistan.
They come down through a well-known smack track trade route. And the drugs, they are not for the Seychelles consumption. For Seychelles, only around 2 or 3 packets. The rest are destined for European markets.
But the narcotics problem doesn't just stay on this side of the globe, says Adham Lutfi, who manages the US Embassy in Seychelles.
Because if you look at the drug traffic, it's coming through this region, but it's not stopping here. It's moving on to Africa, it's moving on to Europe, and potentially to North America too.
Along the way, some of the heroin inevitably ends up on the local market, leading to the heroin epidemic here. The US and China, which are competing for influence in Seychelles, are helping in different ways with the drug problem. The Chinese embassy declined an interview with VOA. The Chinese ambassador to Seychelles wrote in a Seychelles newspaper article in 2024 that China was supporting Seychelles in combating piracy and drug and human trafficking.
So far, we have not received any training from China in regards to the drug trafficking, but they do provide training to our officers. We send them overseas to China. They also provide us with assets. Specifically, we have one vessel, which is in our fleet, operating.
The US is doing its part here, says Lutfi.
We do a lot of cooperation with Seychelles Defense Forces, Coast Guard in particular, on drug interdiction and other sorts of marine security concerns that are here.
For Romeo, all of his energy is focused on sticking with the methadone program.
I want to see my mom happy. I don't want to see her cry.
He has been clean for over a year now and hopes to get his methadone dosage down soon and, eventually, stop completely. Kate Bartlett, VOA News, Mahé, Seychelles.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.